our group, the Tuesday group, is really it's probably best described as a collection of members who are center-right. And I think most of us agree that this country is a center-right country, and I think that our members reflect that center-right orientation. Of course, many of our members, too, should know that our lineage dates back to 1994, when it was the group was founded by a number of folks, including people like Mike Castle, Fred Upton, Jim Leach, I believe, was very involved in the early days, and Connie was involved, Connie Morella, and a whole host of other members Mark Kirk, of course, so he came a little later, but he was, of course, we all know Senator Kirk, very, very active with this group, helped get me involved in the early days. There have been articles written about the Tuesday group's demise. They're simply untrue. Our group has nearly 50 members, 47 to 48 members, depending on the day. We have a number of members who are very active. And I think we have one thing in common. We consider ourselves the governance wing of the Republican Party. We're the folks who understand that we have, as members of Congress, an affirmative obligation to govern. We're there to get things done. Our job's really easy if all you have to do is push the no button every day. I mean, at some point, people have to lead, and we have to stand up. And that's what our members tend to do on many of the big issues that this country faces. So many of our folks are the ones who are involved in decision-making and ultimately in moving the ball forward, moving it down the field. So I just wanted to say that about our group. A couple other things, too. We have a number of our members who are in prominent positions in the conference. So we have chairmen of the committee, Fred Upton, chairman of the Energy Committee. We have 3 leaders who are part of our group, a few cardinals, and several appropriators. Leaders on the Ways and Means Committee. You're going to hear from Erik Paulsen, our good friend and co-chair, and Adam Kinzinger from the Energy Committee as well. And they'll give you their perspectives. So we have a lot of folks on A committees. Again, really, bottom line is our members are trying to get things done. They put forth solutions to real problems that people face. I would argue that many of our members are more focused on the economic issues. I think some of our members tend to want to stay off of the hot button cultural or social issues, but generally want to be very much engaged on these matters of the economy, job creation, energy production. That's what our group is about. Leaders in the tax reform movement. I suspect you're going to hear from some of our colleagues today. Erik, he's a great leader on the repeal of the medical device tax and other issues of the jurisdiction and Ways and Means Committee. Adam Kinzinger is a strong proponent of many national security issues, of course, also serving on the Energy Committee. He gets to deal with that whole host of those issues. So I really just wanted to open it up that way and look forward to receiving your questions. And I'm going to stop right now because we want to hear from Erik and Adam. So thank you for this opportunity. Ripon is a great organization. Glad to be part of it and really appreciate this invitation. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Paulsen, do you want to start? And Adam, do you want to come up as well?
Sorry. Yeah. Erik, now I'd like to introduce Erik Paulsen from Minnesota.
Yeah, why don't you do that? I'll attach this and we'll pass this around.
Thank you. Hi, guys. There's no place for me to put my coffee up here, just so you all know. So I did notice that right away. I think Charlie basically said it all. Look, we're a group of, frankly, there's a lot of us that are conservative. There are some that would call themselves moderate, but the point is we're a group of folks that decide that, look, when you have a third of government, your job is to govern. So when you're in the minority, it's really easy to go home and say you voted no on every bad piece of legislation, because literally all you have to do in the minority is vote no. That's your job, frankly. If you're not voting no, you're probably not doing your job as a minority. But once you take that position of being in the majority, you have a level of responsibility that comes with it. It's especially difficult in a government where you have a Democrat-controlled Senate and a Democratic president. We now find ourselves in a position where we have two choices. We can either burn the place down, and we have the ability to do that. I mean, you don't have to accept anything, you don't have to do anything, you can burn the entire place down and say, hey, we at least stuck 100% to what we believe, or we can actually try to find that area where we can maybe find some ground to move this country forward in our direction. So, without speaking for the other two as an example, at the end of the year we had the fiscal cliff deal, and I can tell you 100 things in the fiscal cliff I didn't like, but I also saw in the fiscal cliff deal that Republicans were able to influence that piece of legislation out punching our weight class. We did, what you see that came out of that was far more than a third of Republican influence. You had Bush tax cuts permanent under $400,000. That's never been done even when we had all branches of government. We took care of the AMT problem, and I got a bunch of farmers in my district that were happy that they never have to talk about a state tax again, at least for a while. So that's what we're here to do, is to say, look, we want to be part of the conversation in moving this country forward, because in my case, at the end of the day, and I'm not trying to sound like overly patriotic, hand on the heart guy, but I will say this. At the end of the day, and at the end of my time in Congress, however long that is, I have to look at myself in the mirror, and I have to ask what I did with my time here. And if I just went home and said that, and started stoking the fires and I said no to everything, and that's not a good feeling. But if at the end of the day I can say I influenced government, even if I have to take a career-ending vote for some reason, for whatever reason, that's the position I want to be in. So I think that's what you're going to see with a lot of our membership, is people that really are just passionate about the future of this country and understand the position we're in. So thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I look forward to having the discussion with you.
Well, first of all, let me thank Ripon for all you do and for hosting these breakfast forums. I did one of these up in one of the chairs at one time with my roommates. Remember that event, the 3 roommates? And they cover the political spectrum on the Republican side too. That was a great conversation. But I think really, just in terms of just providing the ditto, I want to mention that I think many of the Tuesday group sort of, I think, parameters or initiatives parallel about what Ripon stands for. And it kind of comes out of sort of what the Reagan sort of governing majority would want to do. And that's really what the makeup, I think, of the Tuesday group is, because we do have a pretty good selection of, I would argue, conservative members to more moderate members within our group. And, we meet once a week. We have lunch, and, those are always not easy to attend, but it's fairly well attended. The 40 members, we'll have half there easily every single week. And we actually thoughtfully and methodically go through every bill coming up on the floor. Are there additional amendments we would want to propose? What makes sense to move forward? I do remember a couple of years ago when I first got here and I decided to join the group, and I've been following in the footsteps of Bill Frenzel, Jim Ramstad, and I had a chance to join the Tuesday group for the first time, and I noticed Senator Mark Kirk was presenting a suburban agenda. And that kind of got me excited, because it was proactively talking about getting something done, connecting with the electorate, and being positive and for something. And I think, and we'll take some questions here, obviously, have a discussion, but I'm very energized about being on Ways and Means Committee and seeing what our conference has done. We took the majority, we're going to push through right away some tax bills because we have the majority, but we've been very more thoughtful, we've been methodical, having a lot of hearings to move the whole initiative of comprehensive tax reform forward for economic growth, to help our economy. That addresses the budget situation where we have some challenges as well. So I think the Tuesday group, I think by and large parallels a lot of what Ripon's for. And I think when you host these trips, for instance, traveling to Ireland in the near future, that is a central key point of our tax system, looking at Ireland's tax code and some of the changes that we have proposed and we will continue to advocate for, and then really learning from that. So you've got sort of a solution-oriented, thoughtful group that is truly actually trying to get things done. And we all know we've got to be bipartisan in the end. You get post-election, you got to move forward. But you also got to be bicameral, and that's a challenge too, because some of the initiatives we move through in the House obviously get roadblocked in the Senate, and that's I would argue, a little bit more dysfunctional over there sometimes than even the House. But again, it's being solution-oriented and getting things done. And so I think that's kind of our goal. We cover the spectrum on a wide range of issues, and we're a little bit different than the RSC. The RSC is very team-oriented. I mean, they get in there and they'll talk about, let's propose a few conservative, exciting issues on, certain topics. For instance, we literally go through the bills on the floor that week, or coming up in the next week, and then decide how can we shape those, how can we best make sure that we're actually passing policy that we can talk proactively about in our districts.
I want to follow up on one thing that Erik said. Contrasted with the RSC, I get the sense that our group is a lot more member-driven. It's all member to member. We do have staff that attend meetings, but it's really all members doing the talking, and RSC, I think, is a little bit more of a staff-driven organization. Any questions? Peter?
Charlie, you see increasingly the situation where many bills come to the floor, make their way through the process, and you sort of incorporate suggestions from the RSC or other conservative Tea Party activists only to find that it's a somewhat difficult vote, as you might expect, say, with the fiscal cliff legislation or the agriculture bill that came last week. And they end up voting against the measure, sort of disputing the concept as you're letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I was just wondering if your own frustrations with this, and since you've mentioned and Adam mentioned, you're forced to take some difficult votes. You know fundamentally you have to govern. That's part of the process. But you watch there are people who are getting their will, but nonetheless negating that what's going on after the fact.
Well, I think that you mentioned the Farm Bill. I mean, that's a classic example, I think, of what's, it really highlights the problems that our conference confronts, where I did not like the 2008 farm law. I voted against it. Although I tell you that the bill that was on the floor the other day, I feel was better than the current law. And so I think some of our members have a hard time recognizing that incremental progress is good. You don't get everything. And I guess more frustrating to me is that some folks were offering amendments ostensibly to approve the bill. The amendment gets adopted, and they vote against the final bill. You know, and some of us, fought hard. I saw some amendments go in that I liked very much, and one that did not go in on sugar reform that I very much wanted, did not get in. Lost by a close margin. But at the end of the day, the bill was better than the current law. And I think some of our members, they're under pressure from who knows where, but from outside groups and other folks, and and they decide to vote no. And at some point, we can all run around and point fingers at why it failed. Oh, it was the outside groups, it was Democrats. But at the end of the day, when you're in the majority, we're responsible for passing the bills. We can go blame Colin Peterson, or we can go blame Nancy Pelosi, or the outside groups, but it's, we're the ones who've got to get it done. And so it is frustrating. I'm not sure I have a great answer to that. And I think there's we've got to strike a balance. We've got an open process out there where, the more open the process, I think it's harder to maintain discipline. If you close the process, then you'll have people voting against the bills on procedural grounds. I don't have my input, so I'm not sure. We have to strike the balance. We haven't quite figured it out yet in our conference.
I just want to add to that. So, I mean, the reality of what's happening, everybody knows it, so I'll say it. The reality is there's like 30 or 40 people in our conference that just don't vote for anything. You can figure out who they are, but they exist. And I mean, you look at all the tough pieces of legislation, and they won't vote for it. And the problem is when you minus those 30 or 40 people, when you subtract them, you can't get to 218. Now, among those, you have some that are basically libertarians. And my view is, I guess we'll take them voting for our speaker if they do, but there's also a libertarian party, keep in mind, and that doesn't mean that our party should become exactly that. We have to continue to have a very strong position on national defense, which I'm afraid we're eroding. We have to have a very strong position that it's okay to have a federal government. We're not against the federal government. We just want that's smaller, effective, efficient, and is able to do its job with less expenditures. And the problem is we literally have also these outside groups that if you even mention, so I'm a member of a group called No Labels, if you even mention talking to Democrats and saying, hey, let's try to find areas where maybe we do agree, you are now labeled what's called a rhino, just that you are a Republican in name only because you're doing exactly what Ronald Reagan did, which was talk to people on the other side of the aisle. Now, I don't know how we get out of this, and that's kind of the concern is it's ultimately going to take members of Congress that are willing to go home. And, if somebody tries to challenge you on the fiscal cliff vote, you just say, yeah, I understand where you're coming from, and we may disagree, but let me tell you why I got there. That's called leadership, and I'll tell you as a pilot, when you fly formation, number 2, this is the second plane, is all he's doing is looking at the lead aircraft. In fact, as number 2, you have no idea what position you're actually in. You could be at a 90-degree bank upside down, you don't know, because all you're doing is intensely staring at that lead aircraft. Well, the American people are desperate for some kind of leadership out of Washington, D.C. And out of Washington, D.C., leaders out here are desperate to see where the American people are because they're scared to death of losing their reelection. Nobody, not the President of the United States, and not members of Congress, some are, but in general, are not providing leadership, and it's creating this chaotic situation in which it's, frankly, the blind leading the blind. And that's something we have to find our way out of.
Yeah, can you talk about 2 big issues that are going to come up, probably hit the head this fall? One is immigration, as it came out of the Senate yesterday, how the House is going to deal with it, the Hastert rules and the other things, how the Tuesday lunch bunch is going to address this. And number 2 is, the debt limit at some point is going to hit, and obviously, you know, there are going to be a lot of conservatives who want a lot of crazy stuff on there. How do you guys want to play that issue?
Well, a couple of things I'll just mention right off the bat. First of all, I should mention that, you know, the members of the Tuesday group, when we meet once a week, you know, we have leadership come in and meet with us. So as much as, you know, there might be the RSC or other groups that are influential within the conference, I mean, we've got a significant number in our group that are influential as well. Leadership recognizes that, and so we've got a thorough regular communication with the leaders, you know, who lead our conference. And that's a challenge for leadership, how to blend all this together and passing the major initiatives. Immigration is going to be tough. It's going to be tough because it's one of those issues where, you know, it maybe sort of splits 50-50 in terms of being pro-economic, pro-business, kind of your traditional Republican groups being for it, and then, you know, the activist base being very nervous and probably against it. And so it's kind of a 50-50 split on the Republican side. It makes it more challenging, I think, for a lot of members. It's going to be just tough moving forward, but I think the way the House is going to proceed in the near term is moving, you know, pieces of it through, not to avoid the issue, at least that would be my hope, because I do think we need a lot of progress in immigration to recognize labor flow and to make sure we've got a legal system that works so we don't have the illegal challenges, you know, given what's happened over the last you know, couple of decades. And so I think we absolutely can make progress. I do. And we have to see what this gang of now 7 in the House is going to actually formally put forward and what the differences are between that bill and the Senate bill that just passed. On the debt ceiling, we had one conference meeting talking about the debt ceiling as a group, and it was interesting from a Ways and Means perspective that there was a lot of conversation in our conference about wanting to be for something. We recognize that we're going to have to get, you know, something of what the House wants. What should that be? Well, is it entitlement reform? Well, I'm not convinced, and some of us aren't convinced the president is going to want to do some of those things, at least in the near term. That's not, you know, there won't be sincerity there. But what can we be for that helps the economy? Tax reform. There's a number of different tax initiatives there that I think members of our conference across the spectrum were speaking in favor of as a part of reform that we would want to maybe be part of that. So that's a process that's going to be ongoing right now.
The only thing I'll add to that, you know, on the issue of the debt ceiling, I think this is a time for us to be ruthlessly pragmatic. Now, what I mean by that is, you know, we passed it, that we did the no budget, no pay. The no labels group came up with no budget, no pay. We ended up, the debt ceiling debate was about the Senate not doing the budget. It wasn't about the debt ceiling, it was about the budget. And, you know, it became law. Okay, that was a very smart maneuver. It was a 3-month, well, more than 3-month debt ceiling extension. But for the next one, I recommend to our leadership that we do about 3 or 4 things. One, take Erik Paulsen's repeal of the medical device tax, stick it into the debt ceiling. I believe about 70 folks in the Senate have voted for that. Take the Keystone Pipeline. 62 senators have voted for that too. Put that in the debt ceiling. Maybe throw an SGR fix if we can do it there, and maybe add the repeal of the IPAB, the Independent Payment Advisory Board. Send it over to the Senate and watch Harry Reid choke. I mean, seriously. I mean, you know, in other words, unite the Republicans and divide the Democrats. That's how we have to be. Now, this is meaningless if we don't have 218 votes, though. So we have to have 218 votes for whatever it is. The debt ceiling, the farm bill, you know, immigration. On immigration, the only thing I will say is that I do think a piecemeal approach actually does make sense. I mean, you deal with an enforcement piece, border security enforcement. You deal with the guest workers, the ag workers, the STEM workers, maybe as a bill. You deal with the children, probably different than the balance of the 11 million who are here unlawfully, and then break those out too. Those are the visa overstays, and those are the illegal border crossers. I mean, there are certain things that we can do, and of course, fix the exit system in a more meaningful way. I mean, so I think you need to deal with this very thoughtfully. And again, none of this matters unless we have 218 votes. That's the key. So that's how I handle the issues.
Just pray.
Having, along with Connie and Bill, having heard our obituaries since started this thing in '80 again, you know, whether you were a gypsy moth or center right or whatever it is, one of the things that I think as a center right group, you also have to have the political muscle. And that's the one thing that some of your, shall we say, more extreme groups have. Trying to get that. Well, you know, we saw Orrin Hatch, who should have lost in that election. He won because he dismantled and rebuilt a political infrastructure that favored his election. What can you say that as a group you're doing to try and build some leveling of the playing field by getting a political infrastructure to assist those pragmatic members so that they don't, you know, the problem with center right is you go your own way as it
Sure.
relates to it.
No, I get your point. I mean, you have, you know, for instance, Tuesday Group itself helps membership in terms of financially. Main Street Partnership does the same thing. But we need to have these groups that have the big money that can come in and support these candidates. You know, the Karl Rove initiative that he talked about, basically, you know, understanding that we've got to put people up who can actually win general elections. That's something we need to do. In terms of us as a group, I think it's important, and this is something that Charlie Dent has led in terms of bringing, you know, Erik and I on and trying to really kind of build an infrastructure within us that can kind of stand up for something. So it's not Charlie piecemeal going to leadership saying, I'm not going to vote for this because of this. Now there's actually a group of people. We can play the same thing that some of these other groups on the right play. And let me just say something very quickly, too. We've got to get our language in this right. We are an angry party. This is how we're perceived. We're perceived as very angry, as very upset, and the average American looks at that and says, you know what, I agree, the economy's terrible, you don't have to keep telling me that, but I also don't feel near as angry as you are. In 1980, Ronald Reagan won, not because he said Jimmy Carter was terrible and he hated him. He won because he talked about this vision of a shining city on a hill at a time when we had just lost Vietnam. The Soviet Union looked stronger than us, and he even said he could defeat the Soviet Union. And Americans said, you know what, if there's even a 10% chance that what he's saying is true, I'm going to vote for him because I want him. And an amazing thing happened, which is 8 years later. Go to YouTube today and watch President Reagan's farewell address to the nation. As he's outlining exactly what he meant when he said shining city on a hill in 1980, you basically, your eyes are open to realize that exactly what he was talking about was now the United States of America that existed today. We have got to find that message, that positive message that drives the American people to believe we are the party that cares about the poor and the down and out. We are the party that cares about educating our children. We actually are the party that cares about labor. We're the party that cares about that stuff. Here's our heart, here's why. And if we can tap into that message, we're undefeatable.
The only thing I'll add is that one thing that I think makes us stand out is that our group is relevant. I remember there was a time in my political life when if there were big votes, you know, the folks in the more difficult districts often were the ones who might have, I don't want to use the term, gotten a pass, but the ones who may have been voting a little opposite the party. But now we're finding that the folks in these tougher marginal districts who are putting up all the big votes all the time. And folks in the safest districts, some of the safest districts in the conference, find reasons to object and to vote no. And I mean, it's just, you know, the world is upside down. It's Alice in Wonderland. You know, down is up and up is down. I mean, it's just not, it's hard for me to fathom that. And Adam did mention, you know, we've done things, at least, Mark Kirk and I, a few years back, we created the Tuesday Group PAC, which we don't run. It's run by former member Sue Kelly. She's in charge. Karen Egrot's our fundraiser. So we help establish this thing, get this thing moving. That, you know, there's a way to double max to every member of our group. We've done that, and you know, of course, you know, and you marry that with the Main Street Partnership, our brother or sister organization. They're out there doing a lot of similar things, and we appreciate all they're doing. So we're trying to maintain that infrastructure. But I mean, to the extent that our group remains relevant, and we are, because the leadership knows it, they have to talk to us to get things done. And, you know, we let them know when we have problems with issues. I was very outspoken. I didn't like the fact that we were debating abortion bills in the middle of in the middle of all this. I thought it was a mistake, and I said so. And some of our folks are, I think, are starting to speak up quite a bit more about you know, how to move this agenda.
As we move towards energy independence as a country, and given our intellectual capability, we can go back to that, you know, the Ronald Reagan vision of America. In fact, it's going to be our economy that drives the rest of the world. And yet, as we're starting to go through this potential boom period, there's public policies that will help promote it, whether it's international tax reform, you know, opening up trade for U.S. companies, seems to slip off the agenda. And is there a way to turn back to that positive message about the United States can drive the global economy. We are going to be the force
Yeah.
in the country, and why we need a coherent set of policies, whether it's immigration, tax, energy, to lead the way for the rest of for both the country and the world.
Well, it's the key to that is, you know, as Republicans, for us to get a message out, and that's just, it's not Republicanism, it's because we're Congress. To get a message out, you really have to hammer something for 4 or 5 months, and then the American people can begin to parrot it back. The president just needs to go on TV once, he's got every news camera, he's driven a message. So we did that with Keystone Pipeline. We made that an issue that now basically every American is talking about the Keystone Pipeline because we were able to hammer it. I think we have to have a positive America First agenda, a positive agenda talking, you know, reiterating to people. We should not cheer, by the way, when bad economic news comes out, because I don't care if it hurts this president or not. He just got reelected. We should cheer when good economic news comes out. And we need to talk about the fact that we are still the leading economy in the world, even though we don't feel like it. And I think the more we hit that positive message, the more Americans can kind of realize that. They feel more confident, and frankly, the economy is going to grow as a result.
Overall, I'll say this, I think on Ways and Means, we've had an impact clearly on the tax reform area. And if you look back over a couple of years ago, we've moved the president from no tax reform to some corporate tax reform to now revenue neutral business tax reform. And so we've led that, we have led that, and we're gonna have to keep pushing it. I mean, we are in a growth gap, and normally the economy doubles every 20 years, we're doubling every 30 years. So we have a 10-year lag. I mean, we're literally, workers are being robbed, literally about $3,000 a year in disposable income that they should have had. And that's something we can possibly talk about, how we want to grow the economy. And what was the GDP, the numbers the other day, like 1.8%. I mean, it's just anemic, it's pathetic, and it should be doing a lot better. So I think the opportunity for us to help continue to lead and push the administration is on tax reform. I mean, look, it's working in the Senate. I mean, look what Senator Baucus is doing. Rather than these conceptual markups that always happen in the Senate, now you have to actually produce some real legislative proposals and amendments if they're going to start moving the tax reform ideas forward. So Senator Baucus and Dave Camp have been speaking the same language recently on tax reform. So we are trying to lead it and make that a part of our agenda to get the United States back on top.
One thing I'll say on energy is I think we have a wonderful story to tell. When you think about it, being from Pennsylvania, we've got the shale gas boom going on. And we haven't yet fully appreciated the magnitude of the transformational capacities of this change. Think about it. Just think about it for a second. I mean, the fact that we're paying for the cheapest gas in the world now means that it opens up all sorts of manufacturing and industrial opportunities for this country. And this is all happening in spite of Washington. In spite of it. And you look at what's happening in North Dakota with the oil, again, the horizontal drilling and again the fracking has just transformed. We talk about energy not in terms of scarcity anymore, but in terms of abundance. That's all changed, and it's remarkable. It's happening, and I believe our party has been at the forefront of this. The administration really has really been on the sidelines or opposing. Again, we just saw what happened this week. The war on coal is back on in a big way, which doesn't make me very happy, given where I live. But the point is, we have a good story to tell. We can talk about this in terms of jobs, manufacturing, in a way that I think that the administration cannot. And so I think it really helps add to that positive message for us. Connie, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. I feel very strongly of the importance of the Tuesday group. But let's say Speaker Boehner calls the three of you in, and he says, okay, guys, what do you think we can do to bring together some harmony? Not that people have to vote alike, but thinking of the farm bill, it was not perfect, but nevertheless, it didn't look good for the Republican Party. What advice would you give him?
Well, I think it's the same advice we've been giving them all along. I mean, which is we have to be able to. You need to. You're at wit's end. When you put forward proposal, I go back to a Plan B. Back at the end of the year. I think some of our, and Boehner understands this. We're trying to move the ball down the field. We're trying to do things tactically to give ourselves, a better, at the end of the day, to get us to a strategic objective. Like the Plan B thing on the fiscal cliff. And I thought it was a very good idea. That we knew at the end of the year the rates were going to go up 100% of Americans. The debate was, was it going to be at 200, 250, or was it going to be something higher? that was really the debate. So the question is, how do we get that threshold as high as we can to help the pass-through entities, the small businesses that are sub-chapter S? How do we help them? And so we came up with Plan B. And I thought, a lot of us were involved in that discussion about raising that threshold, get up to $1 million, and send it over to the Senate again, and make Harry Reid sweat. And that's what we did, or we tried to do. But it came down to the fact that some of our members, just don't have there's not a pragmatic streak there. In other words, you can be conservative. One can be conservative philosophically and still be practical. And so, again, getting that threshold up to $1 million would have helped us achieve a better outcome, a better resolution. But, we ended up, we got a $450,000. Had we got $1 million passed a week or two earlier, we might have got it up to $600,000, maybe $700,000. We might have been able to do that. But, that's the challenge. And, some of like on the farm bill, some of the folks were upset because it didn't cut food stamps enough or didn't cut the commodity programs enough. But at the end of the day, I said, well, if you were against the bill, you got nothing. If it goes down, you're for the status quo, which is far worse than what was being advanced. And I think there's an education process here. We talk to Boehner about this regularly. He understands it, he gets it, and frankly, it limits his ability to lead. It really limits his ability, and I'm not sure that any of us have a good answer to that. Maybe my colleagues here are smarter than I am.
Well, I think, one piece of advice that I have, and they're doing this, the leadership's doing this, is to continue to have small group meetings in small settings. So you sort of avoid the large group think where the herd starts running in one direction and then you can't readjust the direction of the herd. But having those smaller group meetings with members constantly, and that's a challenge for leadership because they always have to be in that listen mode, right? But when you've got 435 different egos and 200 and some different egos in our conference, you've got to adjust and make sure that there's more of an educational level and understanding about what is good for the team, but also is good for everyone individually. And in those small groups, you can make a lot more progress because it's just more of a shared understanding. And we are seeing some breakthroughs in some areas that have actually worked. And I've talked to a number of members that just came in the last 2 classes, and many of them don't have legislative experience. They were business people or whatever. They ran at the right time. They got caught up in the wave. They ran for the right reasons. And many of them said, boy, I didn't know it was like this. There are good people working here. But I made some of these promises back home. How do I get out of that now? And so, there's some of that challenge. But they're thinking about it. And I think some of those smaller conversations can help move the herd in a different direction in a positive way.
Well, let me just say quickly, for those of you here that are involved in the activity of giving out money to some members of Congress, if they vote more with Nancy Pelosi than they do with Speaker Boehner, they can call themselves a Republican, but they're not part of the team. And all I'm going to say is, whoever you give money to, watch that they're actually advancing the agenda of the United States of America. I say this passionately, not to hand on the heart, sound like a Mr. Patriot, but you have 18-year-old kids that give their life for this country that they barely know. They're in Afghanistan, they were in Iraq when I was there, that die for a country that they've known for 18 years. Every member of Congress ought to be willing to give their political career to defend the same country. And if you're scared to death, if you know what the right vote is, but you're scared to death to go home because the Club for Growth, or because Heritage Action, or because some of those groups are going to come out against you and you might lose your $174,000 a year job, then just look at the people that have given their lives for this country and say sometimes you've got, I'm not saying take suicidal votes all the time, but sometimes you have to do the right thing even if it costs you this job.
Bottom line is, you can't govern from a position of fear. And that's what happens in too many cases. People are afraid to put up a vote because they're afraid they're going to offend somebody on the outside. Well, that's enough to make your hair hurt. You have to analyze the policy. But at the end of the day, you've got to make a decision that's best for your district, best for the country, and move forward. And people aren't going to like it. But I think there's a lot of fear out there. People are afraid to do what they need to do. And the truth is, a lot of our members have only come in during a period of majority. Having served in a minority, both at the state level and the federal level, believe me, having this majority is a great thing. You can accomplish things. And I don't know if you can fully appreciate that unless you've been in the minority, opposite a president of the other party and, the other party controlling the Congress or the legislature. I mean, then you understand what it means to be less effective and irrelevant in many cases. So the worst thing in the world is if you're in a majority, you don't ever want to be irrelevant. You want to be relevant. You got the ball, take it, run with it.
No more questions? Well, gentlemen, it's just about 9 o'clock. We bought these books ahead of time for you called A Passion to Lead, and I think you clearly demonstrated that you have that. We wish you the best. We thank you for joining us. We thank you for your service. And if there's anything we can do as a group to help you, please let us know. Thank you.